So, if you've ever made a D&D character before, you probably had a similar thought that I've had. How would this guy work against a giant kaiju monster? I can't be the only person who's thought that, right? I honestly thought that was just a core concept of character creation. But if you're like me, a DM or a player that wants to convince your DMs to have a kaiju-themed campaign, this is the video for you. I'm going to be going over every monster in D&D that could be used as a kaiju. And I'm going to rank them from absolute crap bottom tier, don't use this monster, to the best that you could possibly use. First of all, what would classify as a kaiju in D&D? D&D monsters fall in different size categories. And we're looking at only monsters that fall in the gargantuan category. Gargantuan is scaled as 25 feet or above. That might be a little bit small for a kaiju, but you gotta remember most of this game is set in medieval high fantasy style. Yes, there's elements of sci-fi and sci-fi fantasy and whatnot, but predominantly it's medieval fantasy. I also want to emphasize right now that there are two big rules for this. The first rule is nothing relating to dragons or giants. That feels like kind of an obvious gimme, so I want to try and stick away from that. I want to get only monsters that would be unique. I don't want to just do the typical, oh yeah, this is a gigantic dragon, would make a fantastic kaiju for your characters to fight. Because objectively, yes, it would, but it wouldn't be fun if the top of my list was just the 3 different versions of the Great Worm Dragons. And the second is that it has to be from an officially released source from Wizards of the Coast. If I start pulling out all of the fan-made giant monsters and stuff, I know there was the one fan-made book, I can't remember the title off the top of my head, I'll put it up on screen, but it's something about the Spirit Realm or something that included rules for kaiju-based combat and how to scale monsters and basically play Monster Hunter in D&D, and it's, from what I heard, it was a very interesting book. Had a lot of good subclasses and whatnot, but that's not what we're here for. But if I start getting into the weeds of all of the D&D YouTuber source books that got released over the years, this video could reach 6 freaking weeks long, and I'm not trying to edit all that. That sounds ridiculous. We're jumping in at the last spot on the list, and the last place entry goes to the Brontosaurus. It's got a stat block in Monsters of the Multiverse, and I think Volvos as well, so it counts for this list. Really only counts because of technicality more than anything else. And yeah, I mean, if you want to try running a campaign where your characters are hunting a Brontosaurus, I'm sure a great DM could make that work. I'm sure they could, but I'm not a great DM that could make that work. I'm sorry, that's just not possible. So it's more just at the bottom of the list because, technicality more than anything else. It's here because it meets the gargantuan criteria, and I have to include it, or somebody would make a comment about it. But, hey. And moving swiftly along. Alright, the next entry on our list is the Megapede, which stat block can be found in Boo's Astral Menagerie. Fantastic title. It's a gigantic millipede, centipede thing, and if you guys were here last year, you know that I don't like those kind of things. So I'm definitely not running it, and that's why it's coming up as the not technically last, but functionally last place on this list. Next up on the list is the Kindori. It's a giant space whale. That's pretty cool. But ultimately, according to a lot of the stuff that's in Boo's Astral Menagerie, which is where this is from as well, it's pretty peaceful, does not really do conflict, and I think its challenge rating was only 7? Let me double check that. Yeah, challenge rating of 7, which means early level parties could easily take it on, and that's not what you really want from your kaiju. Next up on the list is the Aesthetic, I believe is how it's supposed to be pronounced. It is functionally a synthetic spelljammer, also found in Boo's Astral Menagerie. A lot of the bottom part of the list are going to be from that guy, I guess. So the only real thing with it is it has to be created by something, which is interesting at least, but ultimately not as, I guess, important. You could run an Astral Sea campaign where you're being attacked by people that are using Kindori, because it says that the people that make them use them as warships, and that's pretty cool. They're synthetic warships. That's dope. But once again, it's very reliant on what type of campaign you're running And if you kill the creator, it just dies, which, again, not something you really want from your kaiju. Next up on the list is Isperia. She's basically just a giant sphinx. Her stat block's found in Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, and she just acts as a judge, more or less. She's not really anything your party is meant to fight. I guess you could use her stat block for like a gigantic sphinx boss, but I don't know why you want to run that like that. I don't really see a point in trying to use her as a kaiju, so that's why she's so low on the list. Next up is the Zeraton, which is found in Monsters of the Multiverse, and it is a giant turtle earth elemental. And of the 4, yes, there's 4 that'll be on this list, gargantuan style elemental enemies, I definitely think it's the weakest. I mean, it's just a big turtle. It says that the stat block says it expresses its anger in trumpeting calls and the occasional blast of debris, or maybe throwing a boulder, which, like, okay, but, like, there's monsters in D&D that can do way more than that with a way lower challenge rating, and I just don't get why a gigantic turtle requires a band of, like, mid-17th level adventures to fight. Its challenge rating is 22. It doesn't make any sense to me. Continuing on the trend of giant elemental entities, the next one is going to be the Leviathan, also found in Monsters of the Multiverse. It is a giant water snake. That's just kind of what it comes down to. It's a giant snake made out of water. It gets higher than the Zeraton, though, because I think it's cooler, and that's just kind of it. The only real reason I have for it. I think it's cooler, therefore it gets higher. And moving further down the list, but keeping with the trend, the next one is the Elder Tempest. It's a giant wind dragon. Looks a lot like Quetzalcoatl. I think that's cool. He's also found in Monsters of the Multiverse. And once again, the only reason he gets higher than the other 2 is because I think he looks cool. The final one is the Phoenix, also found in Monsters of the Multiverse. It's a giant firebird. Very destructive. Very cool. Could make an interesting campaign boss. And once again, it's only higher than the other 4, or the other 3 rather, because I just think it looks cooler. It's a phoenix. What do you want from me? Next on the list is the Archaic, found in Strixhaven Curriculum of Chaos. And it's a really interesting monster. It is a giant celestial oracle that is, from the lore at least, the reincarnated soul of an oracle that went back in time and was born again as an archaic, which now gives answers to people searching for information in the form of riddles that they have to decode. So it's basically a giant celestial sphinx. And I don't see why you would want to fight it, but I could understand using it as a set piece for a campaign. Like, your characters need to find information, so they're told legends of something, and they find this gigantic archaic monster thing. It gives them a riddle that they then have to try and decipher. I could see that. That'd be cool. That would be cool. But I don't see you wanting to fight it for any real reason, unless you maybe, like, trial by combat. I give you the riddle if you can make me submit style. Next up on the list is the Roc, R-O-C, and it's basically just a giant bird. It does giant bird things. It can be tamed by giants and whatnot, but predominantly it hunts giant whales, elephants, and it says large, slow-moving targets, so that could be like whatever creatures in your campaign or your world are gigantic monsters that just kind of don't move that fast. Ultimately, though, I don't see it being that interesting to try and hunt down or fight, because again, it's just a giant bird. It doesn't even have really any special abilities. Next up on the list, we have the Altasaur, which is in Glory of the Giants, and it is really freaking weird. So there's 4 dinosaurs in that book that I'm going to cover real quick. The Altasaur, Ceratops, the Regisaur, and the Aerosaur. Now this is they're not all taking the one spot, but they're like these gigantic, mutated, magical dinosaur entities that feel a lot like just titans, and I think they're really cool, but I think the Altasaur is the weakest one, because the Altasaur is basically just a giant Brontosaurus. Like, yeah, it's got 8 legs, yeah, it's got a gigantic club tail that creates, like, trails behind it when it walks. Yeah, it's, like, fucking huge, but, like, it's just a giant Brontosaurus. The other ones are so much cooler. Bringing us into the top 20, we actually have the next giant mutant dinosaur creature of all time, the Ceratops. Again, it's really big, it's really cool. The horn is described as being bigger than some giants. Giants in D&D are huge. That's like, what, 15 to 20 feet tall. Like, Jesus, that's huge. It's just a giant Triceratops monster, and Triceratops and Brontosaurus, they're not the most... I mean, Triceratops, yeah, Triceratops can be dangerous as all hell, but, like, they're still herbivores. Leave them alone, you ain't got beef with them. End of sentence. Coming in at 19, we have a three-way tie between the Arcos, or the Colossus of Arcos, the Warforged Colossus, and the Runic Colossus. Runic is found in Glory of the Giants. The Colossus of Arcos is found in Mythical Odysseys of Theros, and Warforged Colossus is held in the Eberron book. And these three share a spot because they are functionally the exact same thing. They're gigantic Colossus monsters animated by magic, machinery, whatever, that ultimately just kind of do the same thing. Have a totally badass, like, God of War 2 style fucking scene for your players, though, with these monsters. That'd be dope as shit. Try that. That'd be fun. I might have to do that now. Next up is actually the Horizon-back Tortoise. These things are cool as hell because they're functionally living siege weapons if you want to actually word it right. Like, there's these things, I can't think of what they are on right off the top of my head, but I'll throw them up on the screen. They're basically like ogres fitted out with like goblin tech and shit for goblins to ride in. This is functionally that, but bigger. Okay? And like, you could absolutely use it like that, and it would be 100% valid and super cool. Of course, you could also have like the living city thing, which would be also valid, but your players probably aren't going to kill it if it's just a giant living city. Next up is the Kraken, found in the Classic Monster Manual. The Kraken is classic, okay, but it's not as great as it could be. A lot of people have come down on the 5e Kraken for not being, like, as incredible as some of the older Krakens, and while I don't know a lot about older D&D, because I just started with 5e, I definitely could see where some improvements could be made with the Kraken. But overall, the stuff for the Kraken, with how it just blows up shipwrecks, or how it just blows up ships, the fact that it could make any seafaring campaign an immediate threat, the fact that in the freaking monster manual it describes that the freaking things can crawl up rivers and destroy settlements that way just to nest in a freaking lake, that's insane. You could absolutely use a Kraken. And I'm also going to shout out real quick the, Tromocratus? We're going to go with that. Stat block in Mythic Odyssey of Theros, where it is basically a mythic Kraken who is, like, souped up to the extreme. If you're going to use a Kraken stat block, I'd definitely recommend using his, because he is, like, just freaking cracked out and insane. And I highly recommend you take a look at his stat block or the Kraken, because they are both great. That said, though, it doesn't go higher up on the list, because it is ideally a water-based kaiju. You're not going to see it as often. There are a lot of other monsters in D&D now that have just kind of surpassed it in overall storytelling. But you could definitely still run a nautical-themed campaign and just drop a drop a Kraken in when your players are high level and, like, just see how they can deal with it, because it would be really fun to do that. Next up on the list, we have the Storm Crab. It gets a little bit higher than the Kraken, but I kind of lumped them together a little bit because it would make more sense to fight a giant crab out of water than it would to fight a giant Kraken out of water. You want the Kraken to be in the water. It's described as a guardian for strongholds and stuff, so you could, like, totally make it the guard dog to your, like, nautical campaign. If you have an undersea temple kind of thing going on, you could make it like the guard dog, and it would be dope as hell to do that. But I ultimately can't put it higher because I can't put the Kraken higher. So, entering into the top 15, we have the Astral Dreadnought, another icon of D&D. The inspiration, in fact, to, I believe it's the Pain Elemental? Yeah, Pain Elemental in Doom. And while I think this dude is cool, while I think you could use this guy if you're doing an Astral Planes themed campaign, and probably should, because those campaigns can go on for a while and can get pretty high level. I feel like he kind of pales in comparison to what I would say would be the best option for an astral themed campaign, but you could totally run this thing as like a Lovecraftian monster, because it is exactly that. It is a freaking monster that just goes around eating shit. It looks so cool. It's got like constellations in its eye. Like it is really cool. It's bringing in the top 15 for a reason, but it's also at 15 because it's more or less locked to the astral plane, and region locked monsters are kind of hard to utilize if you're not using that. You have to really stretch if you want to use it somewhere else. The next spot on our list goes to the Frost Worm, found in Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. It is basically just the purple worm, but for the frozen north. And again, region-locked monsters are pretty hard to use, although you could, in theory, run an ice-themed campaign and have your players fight it, or even just have a world that is like going through a pretty shitty ice age as a result of like an evil spell or curse or something, gods killing each other, whatever. I don't see it ultimately working as well, because you have the other option you could use as well, which is actually our next entry on the list, the Purple Worm. Now, it's more versatile than the Frost Worm. It can exist anywhere. You don't need to use ice-themed anything. Both of these are just animals. They don't make it any higher as a result. You can't really... I mean, you can make a story with them. Don't get me wrong. You can make a story with anything on this list if you're a good enough DM. Ultimately, I just don't see it going as far as you could with some of the higher ones on this list. Next up is going to be the Sky Swimmer. A giant predatory beast, I guess, from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. There's not much to it. There's only like maybe a couple sentences for lore or anything like that, but it looks really cool. It's a gigantic flying sky serpent thing that kills and eats rocks, dragons, drakes, whatever. So you could definitely run a campaign where it's just causing havoc and the players have to stop it. Next up is the Gigant, which is a giant insect found in Glory of the Giants. Ironically, unsurprisingly, probably. I think it's cool. I think you could run a campaign where your players are trying to stop this gigantic hive of monsters from forming and destroying a town's livelihood, or a town, or a kingdom. They're huge. Like, what? There's literally nothing stopping them from killing anything. I think it'll be interesting, and I think that we don't have, outside of the Megapede, too much in the way of giant bug kaiju. So I would like to run a campaign with that. Next on this list, and just short of the top 10, now that I realize I've made a counting error, is actually going to be the Aerosaur, the third of the 4 big giant dino elemental creature thingies from Glory of the Giants. I think it's cool. It's a giant pterosaur that has lightning and shit. You could totally make it like, you could use it as a Thunderbird for like a Thunderbird style campaign or something. You could totally do something with that. And I think overall it's just really cool. I like monsters that are really cool, and these top 10 are some of the coolest monsters that we have at our disposal for kaiju themed campaigns, but also have some of the best storytelling potential that we have at our disposal for a kaiju themed campaign. Let's jump into what is now the new number 10 because of my miscounting. The new number 10 is the Demogoth Titan. Demogoths are in Strixhaven, a curriculum of chaos, and functionally what they are is wishmakers, demon creatures that exchange power for your suffering. They grant people magical boons that ultimately wind up hurting them or somehow backfiring on them, and eventually they can get so large and massive that they functionally just start killing the land around them. And you could definitely run a pretty decent length campaign with one of these as the villain, where like your party's tracking down this Demogoth that's making these deals and it's hurting these people and they're following the trail of carnage, and then at the end they find it's finally ascended to being a titan and they have to stop it before it winds up hurting and killing like thousands of people potentially. I think that would be a really like cool way to run a campaign, and it gives you a long-standing story with an end goal for your characters as well, which hits like all of the key points you need for a good campaign. Lovecraft fans rejoice because at number 9 we have the cosmic horror. Never gets easier for me to say. I don't know why. I don't think I need to explain how you can use this to tell a campaign story. Lovecraft literally made an entire fictional genre of telling stories with these kinds of entities. They are found in Bigby's Astral Menagerie. While the ones in there are kind of you could very easily modify it, homebrew it, and make it work. And you could run a campaign where you basically just play out a D&D Lovecraft novel. You try and stop this cult from resurrecting or bringing this gigantic cosmic entity out of the astral plane and into your world, where it can cause untold chaos and destruction in its wake. Players have to stop it. Of course, with magic and weapons and all of the abilities that D&D grants their players, stopping a cosmic Lovecraftian entity is probably not that big of a challenge, but maybe it's not alone. Maybe it brought friends. Maybe they have to work their way through the cult. Probably that second one. Definitely not the first one, because cosmic entities, everyone knows cosmic horror monsters do not work together as one. Lovecraft did not write Cthulhu to be best buddies with Hastur. Next up on the list is the Flesh Colossus, also found in Glory of the Giants. It is basically a gigantic Frankenstein monster, functionally. It is described as a massive giant flesh, which I'm assuming, like, you know, it's your world, you can do whatever you want with it. You can make it a massive dragon flesh, massive whatever flesh. And what I'm envisioning is like a Frankenstein-style campaign where your players are hunting down this mad necromancer wizard who's robbing all these graves, and he's grafting the bodies into one giant flesh colossus that he thinks he can control. And maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. In my world, he would not be right. He would absolutely lose control of it, and it would go on a rampage and start killing everything. And your players would have to put a stop to it. I feel like it would be really cool. The artwork for it is just horrific. I like it. I think it could work, and I'd like to try and make it work. Well, that puts the next one as the Udak, which is in Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. While it is functionally just a big giant monster, I still think it looks really cool. And I feel like you could definitely do a campaign where you've got an army or a roving gang of mercenaries or whatever that are using this as a way to destroy like towns and kind of shake people down for money and stuff. And it would be interesting. Probably not enough to sustain a like 1 to 20 campaign, but it could be something. I ultimately wound up putting it this high because I like it. I think it looks really cool. So if you're confused by the sudden wardrobe and hairstyle change, this is about 2 weeks later. I was editing this video and I realized I completely skipped over a monster that was supposed to be on the list. So the number 5 section goes to the Neotholid. We're going to go with Neotholid because it sounds more appropriate. Now, basically what a Neotholid is a giant brain parasite, the one that they use to make mind flayers. If you're going to use this, you have free roam to just do a gargantuan mind flayer campaign, which would be so cool. You could run into an Elder Brain, maybe find some way to make an Elder Brain dragon, fucking make an entire wasteland of Neotholids. Like, you could run... The possibility with Mind Flayer campaigns is just so great and so cool that I personally would love to run like a fully in-depth Mind Flayer campaign one of these days. And I very well might. And I'm definitely going to use this thing. Because basically what it is a parasite that is used to make a Mind Flayer that functionally does not get used. And then it just keeps growing and growing and growing, and it just becomes an unstoppable force of destruction. And it is so freaking cool. So, Sorry for the weird, abrupt change in, like, the end of the video. Let's move on to number 4. Alright, next up, also from Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, is going to be the Core Spawn Worm. Now, from what I read, the Core Spawn are functionally like emissaries of some sort of cosmic evil being, and this Core Spawn Worm is basically like their ultimate siege weapon, I guess you could say. It sounds dope when you read the description of it. It sounds like it's like made of lava that's constantly on the verge of like hardening, and it sounds really cool. It looks really cool, and I feel like you could easily run an entire story where you're trying to stop these things from pulling their entity, their god, their whatever, into our worlds and stopping them from destroying it that way. And you could easily have the Core Spawn Worm be like their last resort is for your players and whatnot, and just throw it out, and they wouldn't see it coming, and it would be really cool. I could definitely see that working. That would definitely be a lot of fun. Next up is the Iron Scale Hydra, and by extension, Polukranos, both of which are found in Mythical Odyssey of Theros, and it sounds like it's just a really big Hydra, but Polukranos takes that to a whole nother level by functionally being the incarnation of a god Hydra that is more than content on trying to destroy the world. It's literally called the World Eater. And you could easily run a campaign where more and more Hydras are starting to pop up, and you're starting to go from like bigger and bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden you arrive and you have to fight Polukranos as he's trying to incarnate into the mortal plane and trying to fight and trying to eat the world and kill all of the gods, or whatever his plan is. And I feel like that would be a really interesting campaign, a real epic level campaign, real mythic feeling campaign, and I think that would work out incredibly well. And in our penultimate spot, we have the Regisaur. Godzilla fans rejoice because this is probably the closest we have to an act like a D&D style Godzilla without homebrew. It is the fourth and final of the big giant elemental dinosaur creatures from Glory of the Giants, and it is easily the coolest. Like I said, you could easily run this as a Godzilla of a campaign or something like that, where your players are hunting this thing and tracking it through its through its like trail of destruction, and they need to find it and they need to stop it because there's a great bounty out for it or something like that, or it's just causing so much chaos and havoc that they just have to put it down out of moral obligation. There is so much you could do with this dinosaur. It would be really cool to see, and I might wind up using it in a campaign before too long. So if you're one of my players watching this, first of all, why are you not subscribed? And second of all, prep yourself. But alas, all good things must come to an end, and in topping our list is the great and powerful Tarrasque. Personally, I think the Regisaur is cooler looking, but you can't deny that the Tarrasque is the D&D kaiju, as long as we're excluding dragons. It is legendary. It is so powerful and strong that it's even stated in the monster manual where it's from that some cultures actually worship it as a deity of destruction. Now, do you know how much damage you have to do to be worshipped as a deity of destruction? Like, D&D has 9th level spells that include dropping freaking meteors on people. And this thing does so much destruction that it can be seen as a god of destruction. That is insane. Clearly, if you're running a D&D kaiju campaign, you can't go wrong with a Tarrasque. Obviously, everything I said with the Regisaur applies here, but the Tarrasque just has the wow factor and the dominance factor and the just overall legacy of the monster that it is, where you just feel the power when you play it, and you feel the strength when you use it against your players, and your players feel so incredible when they take it down, because it is the Tarrasque. Well, guys, that does it for this Kaiju Live video. Hope you had fun. I hope you might have got some inspiration for what to run in your D&D campaigns. To be honest with you, I don't think this video is going to be the most highly viewed of this year's Kaiju Live. The same way last year's Kaiju Live's most not highly viewed video was my Mythic Creatures one. But I had a lot of fun making it, and frankly, having fun is what I do this for. And I hope you guys had fun watching it, because obviously your enjoyment means that I'm doing a good job. Next week's video is the ranking of all 10-tailed beasts in Naruto. Stay tuned for that.